Can you hear us back there?
Yeah.
This is an extremely impressive panel, and if I were to read all of their bios and accolades, we take up the entire 2 hours. So I'm just going to give a very, very brief introduction to them, and I'm going to focus completely on them. If they want to add to that introduction, I really invite them to do that. Tracey Becker is the producer of Hysteria. This is going to be very brief. Tracey Becker is the producer of Hysteria and Finding Neverland, which was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. For discussing about movies and adapting and writing, she's the perfect person to be here, as she is not only a producer and writer, she has produced a film about a writer, J.M. Barrie, Finding Neverland, starring Johnny Depp. Oh, should I be talking?
There you go.
We can just hear what Johnny Depp is really like this morning.
Yes.
Names are not right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we.
There's some hijinks going on here.
Who was Tracy?
It's all me.
Yeah, I've already sent it to YouTube. You're allowed to have to change your name.
The last line was, she has produced a film about a writer, J.M. Barrie, Finding Neverland, starring Johnny Depp. Chase Bailey is the producer of The Libertine, Drunk Boat, The Life Before Our Eyes. For discussion about movies and adapting and writing, he is the perfect person to be here, as he is not just a producer and a writer, but also produced a film about a writer, The Libertine, starring Johnny Depp. So,
That is right, isn't it?
yeah, so that's the trick right there. You want to write movies about writers, starring Johnny Depp.
I should leave. I think I'm on the wrong channel.
Will Battersby is the producer of Certainty, The Bleeding House, Trumbo, A Good Marriage. For discussion on writers and producers, he's the perfect person to be here, as he's not only a producer and former literary agent, but he's produced a film about a writer, Dalton Trumbo, but no Johnny Depp.
Liam Neeson?
Liam Neeson, there we go.
A lot bigger.
He could beat up Johnny Depp.
You could beat up Johnny Depp.
And Joyce Maynard is the brilliant author of 14 books, including To Die For and Labor Day, both of which have been adapted for the screen. I think one snippet of a review of her latest book, Labor Day, is particularly dead-on and insightful. It shows, quote, her to be a passionate humanist with a gifted ear and heart. Maynard illuminates the human experience. For those young writers who want some important insights into the process, Joyce is not going to be of much help, because he is just innately gifted and won't be able to communicate her talent. I'm kidding, of course. He's also a great teacher. So this is a
I
dual.
taught Johnny Depp everything.
This is what's great about this panel for adaptations is that we have both perspectives, one from the writer, the other from the producers. So we get to find out what it feels like as a writer to have your work put on screen, and what it feels like to have it changed a lot of times. And we get the producer's perspective about why they torture writers so. Joyce, I had the pleasure of listening to you last night, and Labor Day is almost perfect for a movie. If you could discuss that, because you were
I'll
thinking
repeat
of it.
myself a little for those who were there last night, but I think it's sort of an important thing to say that when I write, and it's actually something that I say when I teach writing, because I think the readers of now are so film-oriented. I often say, could you film that paragraph? Could you film that page? And I am, as I'm writing, thinking about what the movie would look like, which probably Charles Dickens was not doing, although some of those novels would work pretty darn well. Labor Day, even as I was writing it, I felt as if I was describing, I was sort of typing as fast as I could to describe the movie that I already saw. So it was just a joy when, and you don't ever count on that happening. That's just a bonanza for a writer when it does. But I'll have an unusually happy experience probably to recount when I get to talking about Labor Day's adaptation. And actually To Die For, although I have more issues with that one.
Okay, well,
Can I bring up a question on this?
absolutely.
I'm going to be a little bit derogatory.
That's okay.
I
Let's get
read all
some-
the time. I read morning, noon, and night.
Uh-huh.
I read all the time. As a producer, of course, I read a lot of scripts, but I also read tons and tons of books and plays, etc., looking for an adaptation or
Yes.
something that I can purchase the film rights to. One of the things I've seen is exactly what you said, is I'm reading a lot more books that are basically screen adaptations already in a novel form. In fact, I just read one the other day, and I just read it, and I went, this is no longer a book. This is...
And I hear you, Chase, and I will never, I am fundamentally a writer. And so I never want to see a novelization of a movie that doesn't have the movie yet. To me, all story comes from character, and I'm profoundly interested in character and in good writing. But I do think that our sense of story has changed thanks to the literature of movies. And so I'm very aware of all the things that that propel a story in a film, and I try to sort of use them in a book. I mean, I think I'm very conscious of lighting and music and editing and kinds of tools that we weren't accustomed to, or that readers weren't accustomed to in other centuries.
I like reading a novel that's a really well-written novel, and I feel like after you read that novel and you've enjoyed it, then if you think it could make a good film, then you go back and reread it for that purpose. But I hate reading books nowadays, and I can mention a couple, which I won't, but I can mention a couple that I recently read that they laid off the characters. They laid off that the lady walked in, there was a pink blah, 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 there was all this kind of detail. You're feeling that detail. It's almost like that's taken out.
No
nowadays.
argument there. It would actually be more exciting if we did have an argument, but I'll never be the advocate for sort of getting away with all those annoying good writing issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to make that.
And I bet you haven't read a novel of mine if you think that I would do such a thing.
I've not read
It's
it.
very
That
character
would be
based.
corrected. That
Oh,
would
no,
be
I
corrected.
was
Very
I was
deep
just
on
going to come
character.
to Joyce's defense. Not that anyone needs to, but Labor Day, in particular, I mean, I think it's an obvious choice that it's a film, and you said you were watching the film when you made it, but it is so beautifully written, and there's so much that will never be in the movie. That's the joy, I think, of reading, and it's the heartbreak of a producer to take a book that you so thoroughly inhabited, that you were in that world and you were in that experience, and then you're like, it would make a great movie, but then you definitely lose the art of the writing. Even if it's a well-written screenplay, you're missing the detail, you're missing the breath, you're missing the interior monologue of the main character, and that's something you can only get by reading a novel. And so, while obviously the story may very well translate, the subtlety doesn't translate, and sometimes I think a lot of times the author's voice, is lost. It doesn't mean that it's not a good movie or a good story, but then then the director's voice. You're then watching the director's voice instead of hearing the author's voice.
Well, there has to be point of view, and if the point of view is this just sort of godlike eye seeing everything equally, I'm a lot less interested than if the story is coming through the eyes and perceptions of a human being with a pounding heart. And in the case of To Die For, and I don't want to put undue focus on my work here, but there was an array of points of view that was part of the nature of the structure of the book. In Labor Day, the story is seen through the eyes of a 13-year-old boy, and the novel is written in his first-person voice, and I'm not a big fan of voiceover. I think it's too easy to just sort of narrate a movie.
Yes.
But we do very much sense that point of view. This is not what happened. This is what happened as the boy saw it. I mean, it's a romance. It's a passionate sexual relationship, but that he did not see. So it's not. We're not going to have big scenes of Kate Winslet and Josh Brolin well, I mean,
I'm not going to see it.
you'll get enough, but it is always as experienced by the 13-year-old boy.
Fantastic. Oh, interjection real quick. This is Dennis McCarthy. Nobody introduced him. And he's a phenomenal author. I've read all of his books. I hate to say that. But he's a phenomenal author. So we forgot to introduce him.
Thank you. Will, now you're doing an adaptation right now.
Yep.
You just had Certainty. It just played Thursday night to rave reviews here.
Thank you.
It's on pre-Cana, which I think is a brilliant subject
Yep.
for a film. If you want to discuss that, but also your adaptation right now on a Stephen King short story.
Yeah, I mean, both are long stories. The current one isn't as long because obviously we've made Certainty, so the story became longer. That started out life as a play about 15 years ago, and I was actually the director's agent at the time when Mike O'Malley, the writer, and Peter Askin, the director, put that on as a play on the West Coast somewhere. And I don't know, it's sort of, there are a lot of, you've both probably got these stories too, it traces the history of independent film in the last 15 years because there was this moment where Hart Sharp, if anyone remembers them, was going to make the film. Fox Searchlight was really interested, which of course you cut to now. You imagine anybody making a film about pre-Cana.
I have to ask, what is pre-Cana?
Pre-Cana is the program you have to go through to get married in the Catholic Church.
Uh-huh.
It's essentially pre-marriage counselling by a priest, hilariously enough.
Yes.
I had never heard of it before this either.
I had to go through that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing subject. I mean, 1 in 10 people who go through pre-Cana don't end up getting married.
We didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Which I find stunning.
Watch it, man.
Yeah, and
Right choice.
so, the first iteration of that screenplay, because that was sort of back in the glory days, was very expensive. When Peter then sent me the screenplay, 4 years ago, I read it, knew what the landscape was in terms of raising the money for it, and said to Mike and Peter, if we're going to make this, we have to sort of basically gut it and start again and take a much simpler through line through the story, which we did, and then made the film for, we've sold it, so I can say, well under $1 million in the end. But then the latest one, again, was sort of, we got really lucky. Stephen King sent us this short story before it was published with the one-line email, hey guys, I think this would make a great independent film. So we read it, and honestly, it was one of the scariest things I've ever read. Essentially about a woman who, after 25 years of marriage, discovers that her husband is one of America's most violent, notorious serial killers. And rather than ruining her children's lives by turning him in, she decides to carry on with the marriage. And the husband knows, she knows, and it's this sort of bizarre, dark kind of cat and mouse kind of game.
Can I ask, what made Stephen King say that this would be a great independent film? I mean, he could have got Hollywood interested in it. He was Stephen King.
Which is what, honestly, I mean, we've had, Bob Weinstein has been on the phone sort of demanding the rights. We've had huge amounts of it. Matt Tolmach, the producer of Spider-Man, wanted to take it into Sony. And Steve just, liked us, felt that it was a very contained story. It's essentially, most of it takes place in their house. We've opened it up a little bit, and it's really a sort of two-hander.
Whoa.
A la Misery. And Steve is one of the most generous people sorry, Joyce, I don't know what you sell your books for, but, his deal is always, it's a $1 option. And we said, sure, we can pay you $1. So we wrote Stephen King a check for $1, sent it to him. We did a treatment.
How many months did it give you?
The initial option was 12. We're now on, I think we're on year 2. And
Did
we
he
paid
allow
him-
you all the extensions?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic for a buck.
Yeah. I mean,
What a deal.
he gets to essentially decide what color underpants I wear to work every day. I mean, it's not. It's his agents and attorneys protect him. It's essentially a good faith deal. As long as you're acting in good faith, he acts in very good faith.
How much does it get when it goes into production?
A lot.
That's okay.
Yeah. And he owns a vast portion of the film, and
Yeah.
and the deals we've had to make with foreign sales, agents, they didn't like it, but. So we hired a young horror writer, a graphic novelist who wrote a treatment for us. We sent it to Steve because he had approval over it, and we then got the second hilarious email, which was, I much prefer this treatment to the short story. Do you guys mind if I write the screenplay? So we said, sure, we don't mind at all. And yeah, we're on draft 3, and it's been terrific because he's very, very generous because this is a published short story by Stephen King. It was in a best-selling collection, and he's been very generous about changing vast amounts of it. We've kind of had to reinvent it because short stories don't make good feature films, on the page. So it's been really easy and great.
You said graphic novels. Is it the same one that worked on Bleeding House?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well done. You've read my bio. Thank you. Very
I've
impressed.
researched. I've researched.
Yeah.
Tracey, you worked on Finding Neverland, producer of Finding Neverland. That's an adaptation from a play.
It is.
Could you discuss that experience?
It was so long ago. No. Yeah, it was
Or talk about whatever you want.
No, I was really so lucky. Like my career trajectory has been a little interesting. I started as an actor in New York and worked primarily off Broadway. And I worked with a lot of playwrights, living playwrights, as opposed to all the dead ones. And the it is, and it was so much fun. It's really where I realized that I had an okay sense of story. I understood story, and I ended up sort of dramaturging a lot of the plays that I was in. Helping the playwrights develop them, like as we went along, and it's ultimately, I think, what led me to start producing is then I realized, oh my gosh, we're doing all of this work, amazing work, and we're on the 11th floor of a walk-up building on East 38th Street performing for 8 cockroaches and the janitor's uncle or something, and it was heartbreaking. So I'm like, I think I could do better than that. So we started started producing theater, and I belonged to a theater company in New York on 42nd Street, and one of the playwrights was a man named Alan Nee, and he'd written a play for me, which was really flattering when I had been acting. And my partner and I went to see a reading of the play. It was a little tiny production of the play. It was our walk-up theater. Sorry, I'm not very articulate today. And we were sort of blown away by this play, and it was called The Man Who Was Peter Pan, and it was the story of how James Barrie met a family of they weren't orphans, they were fatherless boys, and he was kind of in a loveless marriage and was struggling, not doing his last play or two hadn't done really well, so he was, in trouble in that way, and he basically had writer's block, but the play was very much about the boys, and it was really about how the boys grew up, and then what happened as after they'd grown, and kind of how tragic their lives became, even after this amazing success that had made Peter kind of famous. Peter, one of the boys who obviously he ended up naming the play after. So the play was beautiful, and it was really, really beautiful. And I'm like, there's definitely a movie in here somewhere. But and that's why we optioned it, and we worked with Alan for a year to develop a screenplay. And he ended up writing, I think, a better play than the one he'd started out with. But in many ways, still wasn't a film. He's a playwright, and he's really an amazing playwright. But we just didn't get where we thought we needed to go. So there had been an actor that I had worked with, in the same theater company. And one night we were, having our artistic masturbation, when you all do monologues for each other because you have nobody else to perform for, and you're like, I've got to do something. So he'd done a couple of really cool monologues, and I'm like, you were good, but the material is amazing. Where did you get? I've never heard those monologues. He goes, oh, I wrote them. I'm like, that's what you should be doing, right? You should be a writer. And so I'd started developing a play with him, and he's like, I want to write the screenplay. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you do. He'd heard about, that he knew that we had the option, and I bet you do, but you've never written a screenplay before. We can't, do that. And so he went home and he wrote 30 pages on spec. It brought us the first 30 pages of the movie, and we were gobsmacked is like my favorite word for that, just blown away. And
Have you set it up at Miramax yet?
No.
No, okay.
No, it was, and so we worked with him for a year and a half to develop it. But the play, was not at all like the movie. I mean, the movie is not at all like the play. It needed whimsy and it needed magic and cinematic magic as opposed to the magic that actually happens on stage. And so I mean, David McGee, who wrote the screenplay, ended up getting an Oscar nomination for his first screenplay for Best Adapted Screen. So it was.
And has
And
he
this-
gone on to write other?
He just wrote The Life of Pi
Whoa.
for Ang Lee. Yeah, not too shabby. So.
And this is the actor you were working with who was giving those monologues.
Yes.
He's trying to, and you're,
Yes.
and you.
Yeah.
So you're right on the ground floor of this from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
That is your
what a
baby.
great-
All right.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think that Alan was happy with the film, but I don't feel he had as much ownership of it as some writers do. Like, I think you probably have more ownership of your films because they're a lot closer to the source material.
that's true.
And that's I think with it's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing for producers, I think, to see something in the material. And it's just the hardest thing is with the writers, is with the original source material, because you want it's their words that originally inspired you, and you want to honor them as much as possible, but you also have to honor your vision. And sometimes they're really divergent, and it's really tricky because I think in this business, particularly, writers always get the short end of the stick.
They do.
Yeah.
would say
I feel. Oh, sorry.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
after
Bill.
you.
I feel really fortunate that I haven't yet seen the film of Labor Day, but I've read the screenplay, and all indications are that it'll be very true to my book and in very good hands. I really.
Who did the adaptation?
Jason Reitman.
Oh, he did it himself. Oh, great.
And Buck Henry did To Die For. And in both cases, there are whole sort of paragraphs of dialogue that were in the book. Or not paragraphs, because a paragraph of dialogue is seldom a good idea, but there are big chunks and whole scenes that pretty much play as they did in the book. But what I have most commonly heard other writers, fiction writers, say about the experience is you option that book. If you're lucky, the book gets, it's the 1 in 100 that gets made into a film. Let it go. It's a little bit like launching your children into the world. You have this period where they are to some degree under your control, and then they really are not, and you wish them well and send them out to create their own lives. And if you walk out of the movie theater and actually like the movie, that's an extra bonus. For many writers, it's a very cynical thing. Oh boy, I'm going to get a big check, or a medium check, or a small check.
Or a small check.
Yeah.
That $1.
Chase, you, The Libertine was a play, Drunk Boat was a play, The Life Before Eyes was a short story, I believe.
No, it's
No.
a full novel.
A
Laura
full
Kaczynski.
novel. And then The Tent, which
Short
you're working
story
on.
is, it's not a short story, it's an 80-page novella by Gary Paulson. It's called The Tent, that I optioned a couple of years ago. We finished the script. But going back to novels, Laura Kaczynski, who wrote House of Sand and Fog, she wrote Light Before Her Eyes. No, not House of Sand and Fog. I mixed up Vadim Perlman, who
Vadim,
directed both. But anyway, House of Sand and Fog. Okay,
Caboose.
maybe we should both go out and get a vodka tonic and come back and start this.
I need
But
one
anyway,
too.
Laura Kaczynski, who wrote what's the name of the film I did?
The Life Before
Life
Her Eyes.
Before Her Eyes. Anyway, when I optioned that and we developed a script, she was left out of the cycle. She didn't want to be part of the cycle. She's from Minneapolis, and we were doing this in Paris. And I met with her a couple of times. She actually flew over to Paris a couple of times. She's a phenomenal lady, but she wanted out of the cycle. We did the screenplay. I saw her about 2 years, about 2008. The movie came out in 2006. I saw her about 2008 at a book reading in Paris. And she came up to me and I said, "What'd you think of the film?" And she goes, "I haven't seen it yet." I said, "Do you need a DVD?" And she goes, "I'll pick one up one of these days." I think she was just in it for the bucks. But, she's a great writer. I love her words. And I love that novel, by the way.
I totally understand that. I mean,
Yeah.
you live with a book so closely that when you're done, you're done. And you're on to other stories,
Yep.
and you have your set vision. I don't feel that myself. I really wanted to be on the set. I wanted to be in the movie. You know, but really, what I want to do is my own movie. Is the truth. And
As a producer, I don't want the writer on the
I
set.
know you don't. I got very clearly that
In-
signal
in fact-
from both Gus
in
Van
fact-
Sant and Jason Reitman. Like you, wish you well, but time to go home soon.
Go away.
Yeah.
We,
Yeah, I knew that.
When we did the Libertine, Stephen Jeffries showed up on set every day because we were in London anyway. But we didn't like him there. The director didn't want him there,
I
and the
get that.
producers. But you kind of have to, he would be up there looking at the monitor, and he would mention something, and we'd look at him and go, "Shut the fuck up."
No,
But-
I made 2 quick one-day visits.
Yeah.
And,
He's really very charming.
and I felt they can put up with
You've
that.
worked with me too many
And
times.
actually, if the tables were turned, I wouldn't want somebody looking over my shoulder when I was doing my thing.
Well, it's the director's vision at that time,
yeah.
and you got to let the director,
Yeah.
do what he needs to do.
But it's the writer's baby. Do you have a...
I was gonna say it's the same way on movie sets when the film was not adapted from a novel, in terms of how the directors and the producers feel about having the screenplay writer there.
Yes.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's just, and it's not meant to be callous, and it's not, but it's just, at some point you do have to turn it over, right? And even as producers, at some point the movie's then out of our hands in a way. It's like once it's out in the world, maybe it's not getting the reaction that you wanted it to get. Maybe it's not getting the box office. And then there's still that, then we have the same feeling that the writers then had, which is that, how could you not love my baby the way, the way you should?
Well, then you can blame the director.
And the writer.
And the
And the
writer.
writer.
That's right.
Yeah.
The trickle down theory. But it's just really, and you guys speak up too. It's just having someone there who has a different investment in the material, and they don't. There's no way they could possibly understand everything that you've had to do to get the script to where it is, and then you have to trust the director, and you have to put all of your faith and trust that director is going to handle the material well, and you have to step out of the director's way. So having the writer there, a lot of times is just so difficult because they're and genuinely, and they deserve to have those opinions and they deserve to be able to say them, but it's just, it really can be a really huge distraction.
It's really difficult. I have played all of those roles in film, so I know at least I think I understand the difficulty there. Once a producer hands it off to the director, and the director's got his vision and he's off doing his thing, the
Or her.
producer wants to really have a one-on-one with the director, so that at that time hopefully the producer and the director are on the same page. If they'd better be on the same page. But you definitely don't want the producer to hear the writer off in this side while she or he is trying to talk to the director and goes, do we really need to do that extra take? Do you really want to do that? Because the producer's thinking money and time versus art and product. So it's difficult. You don't want a writer taking you away from that focus.
I had just 1 second, Van. I just had Chase and I actually had a really tough time. We worked together on a short film that Chase wrote and directed.
You
So
fucked that up, too.
I'm the.
That
He
was
is
good.
charming.
All good.
He is.
No, but we had a
What's the
there was-
title? I'm sorry.
Oh, that was Crooked Lane. It was a
Okay.
really, really great film that Chase made, and but we had an issue that came up, and me as a producer, I had to have my producer's hat on, and I had to talk to the director about it, but he was also the writer, so that was tough. That was like a really sticky situation, and I really
Took us
wish
24 hours to get over that
I
one,
wish
didn't
I
it?
could have kicked the writer out of the room. I didn't want the writer in the room, but
Yeah, but you forced the writer to go away for a couple of hours offset to work on it.
Well,
Yeah, and it worked.
I think it worked.
Yeah.
But it was.
I want to hear more about this.
Yes, we have a question here.
I was just gonna say, what was the problem?
The problem is characters. There's a scene in the film where Brett Colin turns to Annie Cusack in the film, and towards the 3/4 of the way in the film, and a lot of people could think that Annie and Brett were married in the past. 10 years ago. And I said, no, that's taken care of in early part of the film because, and we were shooting that scene. And it's where the policeman comes in and asks Breck to come with him because he's a possible suspect for the disappearance of Annie Cusack's daughter. And when he leaves, she stopped the scene, as she should have as a producer, and said, I think we're going to have to clarify because a lot of the audience is going to think they're married, which is true. And I thought I'd taken care of it in the script, which I still believe I have.
Well, no, you would. Well, in my opinion,
Oh, this is an actual. We're reliving an argument we had 5 years ago.
no. The character was written originally as an older man, as a caretaker of the property. So I think we had always just envisioned an older caretaker, and you just have that in your head. Well, when Brett said he'd do the movie, Brett is flippin' sexy, and he's, he's not an old-looking caretaker.
I don't think he's sexy at all.
Well, good. I'm sure Kit is happy to hear that. So he was this vital sexual being in this situation with a beautiful woman, and and there could have been chemistry, between them, but on the page he was a character. It was always obvious that he was a caretaker. But once we're actually looking through looking at the monitor, and I realized that there maybe you could assume that there could be some sexual frisson between the two of them, right? So then it was just like in the moment, it was like, oh boy, maybe we have a problem that we need to fix.
And all I can say is I was angry when I was in director mode, when she interrupted the set. But in retrospect, she did exactly the right thing. I would have done exactly the same thing as a producer. And what we did to rectify this is I went away for a 2-hour lunch the next day because we had a shot, or 2 hours without shooting. And I reread the script and came up with a little solution. I don't remember what the solution was. It worked though.
I've seen Van's hand up for a while.
Yes, man.
I want to go back to process and putting a vision together of the producer in the middle between, if you will, the writer and the director, and trying to secure how much time, what kind of conversation needs to occur. So when in factually, you're actually doing it, and how do you pick the correct director who's on the same page, and what kind of anxiety goes on in that process. And yes, you were correct at that moment for the film. I remember that piece.
You were on set, I think, that day.
Yeah.
But that's a tough question, Van. Right now I've got the rights to 10. It's an 80-page novella by Gary Paulson, who's a very famous author. And I purchased, and writing the script has been very easy. I got a good screenwriter, but finding the director is very, very difficult because as producers, I'm working with Brett Colin and Scott Mednick on this film, but I'm the head producer, and you got a vision. Now we have to find a director, and that's been the hardest thing, is to find a director that's got the same vision we have, because we've worked for a couple of years developing the script. We know what it needs to be. We know how to market the film, etc. We got the whole package put together, but now we need a director on board that's got a couple things. He's got the same vision, but he's also within our price range, and also he's marketable to the investment community. And there's other minor issues, but those are the major issues for me. So you had to find a director for Finding Neverland, right?
At that point, actually, we had sold the project to Miramax. So it was really interesting when Harvey Weinstein said, here's Mark Forster, and we'd love him to do the movie. And all I'd seen was Monsters Ball, and I couldn't at all understand their idea until I met Mark, and who is a really beautiful, really artistic, really sensitive, European guy. And he has like this really great sense of magic, but you never would have known that, from just watching Monsters Ball. So I didn't have much to do with it. They just said, what do you think of him? And then once we met him, it was like, great. But that was Harvey's call. But
Yeah.
I'm doing an adaptation now, actually, we're gonna go into production in a couple of months, and it's a relatively unknown book. So, and the author, thank God is dead, so I don't have to worry. So I don't have to worry.
How do you feel about that, Joyce?
Pleasing or not pleasing him. Oh no, I'm just kidding. But it's really the story is really interesting. It's mostly a made-up story. We know the real facts. We know that 5 people, sort of ended up on this Galapagos island in the Galapagos archipelago, and then, several months later, only one of them left alive. So that's what we know to be the truth. Whatever
there's a documentary in the works about this too.
Yeah. Is there?
Or maybe this
the
is
Galapagos affair?
Is this Dan and Dana?
No.
No, then there's
No.
another.
Oh, yeah. So there's a competing, German movie. They're trying to a German language film, but it's the story takes place in 1929. So why it's hot again, who knows? Why it's hot all of a sudden? But so a lot of the stuff that happens on the island is largely unknown and made up. And so our amazing screenwriter William Boyd was able to just go to town with it and have some fun. But the whole idea, director. So for that, it was finding a director. I went through a bunch of really amazing names, and a bunch of people got it and liked it. But I had just come off of my film Hysteria, which I developed with the director Tanya Wexler for 7 years, and I just gave her the script, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And she absolutely fell in love with it, and is bringing a whole other piece to the. She's answering questions that I didn't even know had been asked.
Just out on DVD, by the way, Hysteria.
Oh, yes, please go rent it. Thank you. Nobody saw it in the theater, so red box it, Netflix it, please. So with that, it was just easy. It was a personal relationship. Somebody who I knew, would react well to the material, and when Hysteria, did all right with reviews, and a lot of actors want to work with her, so it just ended up.
I wanted to say something about what I think is an absolutely, and of course I'm going to think this because I'm a writer, justifiable and valuable role of the writer.
Yes, we need someone to stick up for writers here.
Yes, and I'll say first what I understand it is not, which is to deal with the structure, the pacing, the timing, how scenes go one to another, and the look of the film. As a writer, I care enormously about voice and dialogue. I think that's one of the reasons why the books of mine that were made into film did, that they sound like real people. And when I read the screenplay, and for whatever odd reason, I believe I really know how to sound like a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
That 13-year-old boy in particular. I know what he says and what he doesn't. And it's as if I could hear somebody, talking with a bad New Hampshire accent, and I'd say, that's not how they'd say it in Manchester. And in the same way, when I read the fine screenplay of Labor Day, Jason Reitman's, and he was once a 13-year-old boy, I have to add, but there were moments when that boy did not sound like that boy, and I gave very detailed notes, many of which probably are not going to have been taken in. I think that was probably a mistake, and I recognize it as the director's need to be very, very protective of his space. But they were really about, that's not how the boy would say it. It was small, micro, and I say this just sort of advocating for the writer, where there's a scene, I'll tell you one sort of odd little moment, which might make absolutely no sense to you if you haven't read this book, but I'll give it a try. The boy, 13, the book is very much about an adolescent boy's experience of sexuality, his mother's sexuality and his own. He's watching his single mother, who's lived a very isolated, scared life in her little small world of her little New Hampshire town, embark on a love affair with a very dangerous seeming man, and they're all contained in this house over a long weekend of Labor Day weekend because he's a convict on the run, and he is sort of watching the two of them fall passionately together. But he is also, like a 13-year-old boy, he's thinking about his own sexual life and girls and women and trying to figure things out. And into his world comes a 14-year-old girl who is, as 14-year-old girls are, I mean, she's much more worldly and manipulative, and she's also all wired up about those things, but she behaves in a very different way. They're having a conversation, and she's being very basically seductive of him. And in the book, she she refers to his penis, and she uses the word penis. And it is a moment meant to sexualize that encounter. And it is mortifying for this boy, although he wants to convey that it's not. In the screenplay, Jason, about whom I have a very high regard, has the boy say the word penis in front of the girl.
Oh.
Now, I just...
I read the book. I can imagine.
I just felt, and I actually, twice at 2 different stages of the screenplay, I said, this boy would never say that word out loud in front of a 14-year-old girl. And to me, and I will believe forever that I'm right. Well, I'll keep an open mind, but I think he's going to say it in the movie, and I think it's dead wrong. And it won't spoil the movie, but it will not. It has to do with the ear. It's just like a mispronunciation of a word, and that's the moment when I think the writer should be respected.
You know, this, excuse me, the book that I have the rights to.
Well, I'm going to get you in here, Will. I'm going to get you.
I keep cutting
Well,
them off, man.
I will.
But the tent, this is so at home because Gary Paulson writes teenage books. Gary Paulson's famous for that.
Yeah.
And the story, The Tent, the novella, it's 80 pages. We had to make it 120, of course. But it's from the perspective of a 12-year-old boy with his father that's, the mother has left.
And he's very good at that.
Yeah, he's very good at that. And Gary asked us to, if he would have kind of like a say in who the screenwriter would be. And we went out and looked for a guy that actually knew of Gary Paulson and had written a whole bunch of Hallmark movies that were in that same sort of genre. And we got Richard Leder, who wrote a phenomenal screenplay, and Gary loved it. So we were lucky in that respect. But it is important to think about, well, I don't really care about the writers, but that was a joke. But in a way, you want to make everybody as happy as you possibly can.
And I have to, since this is a New Hampshire crowd, I have to just tell you very quickly one other moment that I had to step up. Jason Reitman grew up in Beverly Hills, and this movie is set in a small town in New Hampshire. And there's a line in, of course, it's not even going to show up in the movies, but I just needed his vision to be corrected. He speaks of how the woman lives in the suburbs of this town.
Yeah.
And I explained that there were no suburbs.
Joyce, it's really good to hear you understand what New Hampshire is.
Yeah.
There are places that it ain't.
Well, I was born here, which of course does not give me full credentials because my parents and grandparents weren't. But yeah, I have it.
Still claim you as a native.
I
And all your books are set in New Hampshire, aren't
just
they?
about everyone.
Just about,
everyone.
That's right. Will, you
I've
were...
forgotten what I was going to. No, I was going to jump to the defensive writers too. I mean, one of the nice moments in the adaptation of A Good Marriage was, you go down the rabbit hole of the screenplay adaptation, and I'm sure this has happened to you guys. You kind of got your vision, the director's got his vision, and you always have this moment where you're like, there's something that isn't quite working. And I just sort of had this funny moment where I thought, I should go back and actually read the short story. And I did, and it answered all of the problems for me, and we actually reinserted a lot of stuff. And that's the same writer. He'd even gone down the rabbit hole and obviously hadn't looked at his own material, had forgotten why characters did certain things, what the experience was that drew us all to the original piece of material. And by reinserting some of that, it completely solved the screenplay for all of us. So that was a very nice moment.
Now, Stephen King did not like Kubrick's version of The Shining.
Right.
So are you a little nervous that...
Honestly, I mean, I've never worked with an easier, more straightforward human being. So, I mean, it's a dollar option, but he has a lot of control over this project. But he's the kind of guy where if you come at it with honesty and good faith and you say, I don't know when you really don't know and don't bullshit him, he's completely generous back. So I am not nervous about it in the slightest. I was far more nervous on other projects with far lesser known writers because he knows he doesn't have anything to prove. He's Stephen King. Yeah. I mean, and also, I mean, you look, I think there's a short film here at the festival that's based on a piece of his work as well. Yeah. And, so he's obviously really generous with his stuff and how he is, so no.
Yes.
Tony Grisoni
The French did that.
Yep.
Yep.
Sean Leray.
Yeah.
He, what's it called? He said that when he was adapting both works, he started off with the source material and went through it with a highlighter and just highlighted all of his favorite parts. And then he took those and said, okay, what do I need to have in order to just connect those favorite parts? And that would be the film. So essentially, he took his favorite parts from the book and said, okay, whatever's going to be in the film is these parts and whatever I need
To
bare
connect.
minimum to connect those moments. Is that, would you say, how you started off adapting your source material to the film medium, or did you have a different process?
It's how I based. Yeah, I mean, when you're putting together a treatment, which is generally how I would always start. You insist on a treatment, and whether you have a writer do it. Occasionally I will do it with a director. I mean, I work slightly differently from Chase in that I always have a director from the very beginning. Whether it's a writer-director or I would never, actually have never and would never adapt a piece of material and then try and find a director. Just because I feel like finding then you've got a round peg and a square hole and so I would work with the director and or writer, figure out the treatment. Because that's the most important thing, I mean, and again, and with Chase and Joyce on this issue, you respond to something in the underlying material, and it's then about crafting a movie to convey that same experience.
I've worked it both ways. I mean, with Vadim Perlman, we got the rights together. Even though I bought the rights as Let Bank Films, Vadim Perlman was the director that introduced me to Laura Kaczynski. So we worked together from day one. But in other things, I develop the script and find a director at the same time I'm developing the script. So we know when a director comes on board, like we just hired Bo Welch to direct the film, The Tent. And now he's off looking, Bo Welch, yeah. And he's a phenomenal guy. But anyway, we're going to be working with Bo over the next couple of months, just getting his input and his changes he wants to the script. So it's an additional process that you have to go through, but it's always a one-off. It's timing, kind of. The original director we wanted for The Tent couldn't do it because he had so many, we wouldn't have been able to shoot it to 2016. He's in such demand. You know what I'm saying?
And then you insert the actors, and when you're talking about a Johnny Depp or an actor of any caliber, is going to have a whole set of notes too about the project that they'll talk to the director about. Then the director has to convey that to the writer. I mean, I don't know how you guys do it. I try and make those conversations happen simultaneously because a director communicating an actor's vision to the writer is invariably going to contain a lot of the director's vision. Hopefully your director and writer get along, and sometimes they don't, sometimes they're not seeing eye to eye, but then you've got an actor, and that's also the interesting thing, and it's why having brilliant underlying material can also complicate things in a way, because everybody responds to it differently. I mean, it's like just hearing you say that a 13-year-old boy would never use the word penis. That's completely female perspective.
No, it's just, I think it's that particular.
Oh, it
That
may be,
boy.
yes, but
situation.
Yeah.
hearing the description of it, I can sort of think, well, actually, I can see why Jason Reitman would put that in a boy's mouth, and it just, that's the process of adaptation, is trying to make all of those voices, and that's why good producers are, like Chase are, a rare breed in that sense.
I'm a good producer.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
flatter you.
Start off with like a scene-for-scene adaptation of the source material. You get the director's input, the actor's input.
Can I be anal with you? I'm going to be real anal.
Sure.
It's got to have a story. You got to start with a story. You got to have characters. You got to have a story and characters. And if you don't got that, you can paste as many scenes together as you want to.
Well, I've got to say, Chase, I'm totally in agreement. I believe in story, but a few weeks ago, I saw a screening of what is supposed to be, going to be a huge blockbuster film, the
Atlas.
Cloud Atlas.
Yeah.
Cloud Atlas,
Cloud Atlas.
which is an adaptation of an enormous novel, unwieldy novel, whose author, and this is embarrassing, I can't think of his name, but Cloud Atlas is this mega, it's 2.5 hours long. There is no story. And my boyfriend and I walked out of this screening and said, this was really not meant for us. This is another generation's movie. I didn't see character in that.
It's going to tank, though, isn't it?
I-
Because they don't. You can see they don't know how to market that film because there's no story. You look
There-
at how many trailers they've done with, Lena and Andy.
Well, it'll be
having
interesting to
explain the movie.
Yes.
to
Right. The
audience.
trailers
I think
are
they're in trouble.
incomprehensible.
Yeah, I think they're
Yeah.
in trouble. Because there's no
But
story.
I'm wondering, if it's not, it's because there are spectacular effects. There is the huge gimmick, and it is kind of fascinating to see Halle Berry and Tom Hanks play 6 different characters, a few of whom I didn't even know they were playing until the credits ran. And maybe you go, that's another reason that, some people see movies these days. It's not why I go, it's not what I'm looking for. But I would see that as a very good measure, and I can totally believe that the adaptation of that did involve highlighting scenes.
Well,
To me,
they
I
actually
would,
did,
if you could do that to a book of mine, just take a highlighter to a few things and patch them together, then I'd say that's a lousy book.
I think it was GQ. I read the story about them living on an island for months
Yes.
with 3x5 index cards and basically writing all the scenes and good parts
It
in
was
it.
the New Yorker. You're more
It was the New
sophisticated.
Yorker,
Yeah.
Yeah, how they wrote the script, and it was sounded like the 3 of them just
And then they tossed all the cards up in the air.
exactly.
Yes, question here.
I have a question about casting, because I
And
find that
I'm coming to you.
fascinating.
I'm going to come.
This,
No. I meant later. I was.
Okay,
for that,
sorry. So if you're adapting a book, and then you have a screenplay, and now you have to cast it with actors, and you either do have a director or not, are you imagining what the character looks like in terms of physical traits, and how true do you have to stay to that vision of it's a tall blonde woman, and it's a short, whatever, African American boy, or whatever it is? Or can you imagine an actor who may not be the physical type described in the book pull off the character because of something more inward, or something you see in them in an audition, or how does that work?
You have to be a little careful. I mean, if something is a massive bestseller, you don't want to veer away too sharply from it and turn the
Like
character
about
into
Hunger
a...
Games, yeah.
Yeah. But I think again, you're bringing a whole new set of visions to a piece. So, be daring, do something different. If the director has a different vision than the novelist did, go for it in a sense. But I never cast with a particular type in mind, because I think you're going to always miss the most interesting. I mean, our film Certainty here, I mean, it's not a well-known play by any stretch of the imagination, but, it has a sort of kindly older priest who's called Father Heary, and so everybody was sending us John Mahoney, Brian Dennehy, and we cast Giancarlo Esposito, a black Italian actor who's phenomenal, and we discovered, he got on
Right.
set his first day, he had considered going into the priesthood. And we did, and that's where you sort of feel like, okay, sometimes the universe speaks to you. But
And I'll tell you, I was privy to the list of the actresses who were looked at for the role that ultimately was given to Kate Winslet. And if you saw those, I mean, there was no physical similarity. I mean, they did all happen to be beautiful, but different kinds of beauty. Completely.
Well, when I read the book Labor Day long before I knew Kate was the actress. I never would have seen her.
No,
never,
not me either.
Never. I saw someone more frail, someone less voluptuous, less comely. I think is there, like, but I knowing her work, now I'm like so excited to see it, I never would have thought to even cast her, like even in my mind, I think whenever you read a book and you start to say, ooh, wow, who am I, who can I see playing this, even when you're reading the book, you start to cast it in your head, and she would never have been on my list, but I can't wait to see it now.
well, there are 2 types of films. There are films that have to have a certain caliber of cast, which is why you get those lists that have, Halle Berry, Sandra Bullock, and Julia Roberts on them. And then there are movies, if you're lucky enough to ever make one, it's very rare, where you can cast anybody. I mean, that's really rare, and you're really working
You're
a budget
really
of,
lucky.
Yeah, you really.
nothing.
$20,000, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you like that better? You prefer that experience?
When you
better?
can cast anyone.
When you can
Yes.
cast
Oh,
anyone?
Yes.
It's a dream.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
We when well, The Light Before Our Eyes. I mean, we went to Uma Thurman first, and she turned us down for some minor reasons, and then we went to Nicole Kidman, who turned us down because of the abortion scene in the film. And Uma Thurman, right after, and we wanted Uma. We just really want to do them because we had Ava and Rachel Wood, and they look alike as the younger and older. It would have been harder with Nicole. Nicole turned us down, and in that meantime, Uma came back to us and said she had time and she wanted to do the film. So it really worked out well for us, timing-wise. But I agree with Tracey. When we're developing the screenplay, you automatically put in your mind sometimes I even know the actor that I want to work with in that script when I'm reading it, when we're developing it. And, you know, it hardly ever works out that way, I hate to say. But
There is in To Die For, the situation in To Die For, which is very loosely inspired by the Pam Spart case, and it's about a woman who's obsessed with fame and getting on television, and kills her husband to sort of promote her career. And she, at one point, she is lying in the tanning booth speculating on who should play her in the movie version of her life. And she speculates that she thinks Tom Cruise's wife, this was written back in 1994, so she thinks Tom Cruise's wife should play her, which was, in fact, who played her, Nicole Kidman, that was an early film for her. She wasn't a big deal then. But when I met Nicole, she said, you know, it was really so thoughtful. Columbia Pictures made a special edition of your book for me, with me in it. But I'd actually pictured like a B grade Nicole Kidman, somebody who just missed being Nicole Kidman.
But remember to tell every actor that they were your first choice, and that they are the only person anyone's ever talked about.
When we developed this, we developed it with you in mind, and I can't believe we were actually lucky enough to get you. It was,
And they'll believe it. They do.
They will. They're
Because they're movie
I
stars.
don't think they do.
No.
Yes.
A few questions. Your book, where was it set?
Labor Day?
Yep.
It was in a small fictional New Hampshire town, which it was filmed actually just over the border in Shelburne Falls, Mass, and Acton, Mass. But the exteriors were Shelburne Falls.
Very cool. And I was wondering if you guys could speak about your approach to in the actual development with the screenwriter, like literally how you go from the book or the play, and how you go through it in your relationship with the screenwriter.
You know, it's kind of been pretty generally, you work from a beat sheet right off the bat. In other words, when you sign a contract with a writer, one of the things we haven't touched on in this whole thing is the legal ramification of getting the rights and what that means. It's also your legal ramification when you work with the writer, because you got an appendix that says, within 3 months I need a 3-page beat sheet, and then 3 months we'll do this, and 3 months we'll do that, and 3 months we'll do, and you try to stick to that. When we hired Richard Leader and we got the contract signed, and by the way, if you hire a writer that's WGA, you got to pay for their insurance and all that other kind of stuff. There's a lot of money that gets involved here from a legal perspective. So he'd write a beat sheet, and I'm working with 4 other producers, Scott Mednick, Brett Colin, Alan Summers, and
The other guy.
Kevin something. But anyway, it's really basically Brett and I. And we look at the beat sheet, we send him back notes, and we finally get a beat sheet, and then we all get together in a conference room, and we just basically take over that conference room for a weekend, and we work through the story. We work through the story from the beat sheet. Always referring back to the book, always referring to the characters and how it all comes together. And then once we get that, we start working on developing the script around those beat sheets. And it's always a one-off, depending upon what like with The Libertine, it was very easy because he'd basically written a script from the play. Stephen Jeffries, who did the play, also did the script. But when you're adapting a novel or something like that, it's always kind of a one-off depending on what it is.
My favorite adaptation, I told you I'd get it in. My favorite film, one of my favorite film adaptations from a novel was actually also written by the novelist, but they bear little resemblance to each other in a way, and it was The Cider House Rules.
I thought you were going to say that one.
And I'm a huge John Irving fan, and I love
more
that
New
book
Hampshire.
so- Yes, and it was very close to being here on the panel.
Was he really?
Yeah. So
Canada.
so I was so excited to see the film, and I don't know if any of you know the book, but the book is a huge sprawling story that it's like decades long, and he focused only on a little chunk of the story, and he could have taken a chunk from anywhere. Like, not that it could have been 3 movies, but you really probably could have written 3 different movies from the novel. And it was just the piece that he took wouldn't even necessarily have been my first choice or what I would have thought of. But I thought he was so clever, and it was so interesting because he really has a sense of film. He's really a screenwriter as well, and I don't think that all novelists are screenwriters. And in fact, I know they're not. I mean, I've worked with another author on an adaptation of her own novel, and it just doesn't work. She just can't do it. She can't wrap her head around, trying to tell the same story in a completely different format with, a really very strict, sense of time and all of that. But I think that John Irving.
And actually, when they did Widow for 1 Year, although he didn't write it,
Yes.
Door on the Floor is once again a small piece of that
Novel, right?
Of that novel.
And then A Prayer for Owen Meany was also horrendously, and he actually had them take the name off of that film. But that was I think that's one of my favorite novels too, and it was just like a really ham-fisted.
Yep.
I don't know that I think it was the least obvious choice for an adaptation as well, because that particular book all comes. It's the voice of this small, strange boy. And it's all about how when he speaks, if you don't know it, when Owen speaks, it's all in capital letters, like in the book. And it just because his voice is not only unique, but he's like squeaky, and he's just the most odd character. And it's just not an obvious choice. You'd never, to make that little kid, he would have to be the star of the movie, basically. And so anyway, that one didn't work out so well.
Some things are better left to the
Yes,
imagination.
exactly. Some
And
books
Owen Meany
shouldn't be. Some books just shouldn't be adapted.
I think one of the things that is certainly probably true of everybody here who produces is being specific with writers about why you're giving notes is really, really important. And whether that's specific in the sense of you think, and I do this, and I know it drives writers crazy sometimes. Literally I say, I think these should be the words that this person says, or this should be the description, not what you've written. Or it's saying, this dialogue isn't working for me because it doesn't fit in thematically, or, it needs to echo something later or earlier, or, whatever it is. But, a very good friend who wrote and ended up directing The Bleeding House, this graphic novelist, is going through this situation at the moment where he's literally being given, and he showed me these notes by a very large producer in LA who shall remain nameless, notes like, I don't like this line. And so he then is writing his own response to the notes. Why? I can change it to anything, but and so I think the dialogue has to be very specific. And, and again, those kind of written notes, which very often get fired off, particularly in that world, they can be so absurd, and that's why you get a lot of shitty screenplays, I think. Because I think sometimes writers...
You're writing by committee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, there's that too, which is,
Dialogue is the toughest thing to write. It's I agree with what you were saying earlier, Joyce. The hardest thing is getting dialogue correct so that the character's arc follows the arc, so that the character and the arc of the film stay together. It's so hard to get that right. Every time I read a script, I go, oh, fucking dialogue.
Will, you were a literary agent. Yes, I couldn't think of that word. You were a literary agent for a long time, so you've read a lot of bad scripts, I'm sure, as well.
yes,
a lot of
represents a lot of bad scripts.
Well, all of you have probably read countless bad. What's the quickest you've ever thrown a script away, and why? Do you have?
I can tell you exactly why. It's spelling mistakes and punctuation mistakes.
So just even the presentation, you don't get it.
Page of a script, that person's not a writer.
Right. Boom.
If they
Gone.
can't spell
Right.
and punctuate English, they aren't a writer.
Especially nowadays when you-
S, a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
When it's supposed to be ITS.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
That's,
THIER, that one all the time. There's another, even before I get to the first page, if it's 162 pages long, that's chucked.
Boom.
unless the Wachowskis sent it.
Unless
you
John
don't need to,
Irving,
yeah.
unless John
Unless
Irving
John- yeah, I was
sends it,
gonna
or,
say,
you know, and then.
I agree with all of the above. I very seldom don't read 15 pages. I very seldom, even if there's spelling mistakes or whatever, because there could be a gem in there. And I have actually read a full script, even though it was badly conjugated and et cetera. It's just, there's a story there.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a girl out of Philadelphia that sent me this phenomenal script. I think you read it, Mitch, or at least I may have given it to you. It's about this woman. She wrote horribly, but I got through the whole 90 pages or whatever, and I loved the story about this woman who's actually a killer and worms her way into this small community and actually kills a few people around there. It's just the way she did. It was very dark. I love dark. And it was just a phenomenal story. So I went to her and I said, I would love to buy this script and give it to someone else to write. In fact, I was thinking about writing it myself. And she goes, no. I said, well, I'll pay you money to buy this script from you. I said, no. I said, okay. And she eventually went off and made the film. Horrible film. But she wouldn't sell it to me. But occasionally I will read a script that is bullshit. Even formatted incorrectly. I mean, my God,
Oh,
learn
Chase,
how
you're
to
a stronger
format
man
it.
than I.
Here's one.
Yes.
Is there ever a timing or best timing to get scripts to you? Season of pitching that you guys
It's different from TV. There isn't, that in TV there's a very specific annual schedule. For me, I tend to read more over the summer. Hopefully I'm in production in the fall or the spring, but no. I mean, I think any
But
time.
how do you get your scripts?
I mean, honestly, the ones I read fastest these days, and it's very, very different when I was an agent. When I was an agent, I didn't respond to anything because you have all these legal ramifications and blah, blah, blah. Now, if a writer picks up the phone and calls me and has actually taken the time to track me down, I will read that faster. I never read scripts that agencies send me. It's just become my new policy, just because they're always terrible. And they're the last people to find the hidden gem. They're the last people who will get
So
their hands-
ICM, is that what you're saying? So
Yeah.
so if ICM, which is who you used to,
If they send me a script and I have 5 scripts to read in a weekend,
Really?
and
That's
the writer
interesting.
has called me that week and pitched me, and I've responded to the writer, and sometimes you just like, oh no, I'm not going to read this script when you speak to them. But if I've responded to the writer on the phone or in an email, I'll read that script far quicker than I will
Wow,
the agency script.
okay.
Because also as an independent producer, it's different. I'm making movies, in a kind of $500,000 to $5 million budget range. Agencies are sending me stuff that they haven't been able to sell for more money. So I know it's the bottom of their pile too. So it's
Oh.
kind of, it's like,
And what's your phone number?
honestly, but I'll give you my email. Find me, call me. I've sort of given up, this is a whole different panel, but the sort of institutional stuff, I just find is so bankrupt creatively, morally, that I just look for it elsewhere.
Will, I'm interested how Stephen King came to. I mean, it's a very flattering thing that he
It is.
chose you.
He'd
to
heard about
entrust-
me. No,
hasn't?
Peter was directing a musical that Steve and John Mellencamp wrote.
Uh-huh.
Peter is a very big off-Broadway theatre director, and Mellencamp and King wrote this musical, which was happening down in Atlanta, and Peter had been directing it, so knew Steve. And I think he had read the script for The Bleeding House because we were producing it while they were doing the play. And I think his only comment was, great title. He never said what he thought of the screenplay, but then he sent us the short story.
Nice.
And I was convinced. I read it and was like, oh, he was at CAA at the time. Then there's no way they're going to give us this piece of material. But we said, sure, we'd love to do it. And his agent, Rand Holston, is a great guy as well, and has since left CAA, not surprisingly. But and they stuck by it, and
Fantastic.
yeah.
It's good.
And
I
another-
read everything. Just to let you know, I just read everything. It might not get to it for a couple of months, but I read everything.
everything he comes to.
Is there any story or tone of the film that you haven't done yet that you would love to do? Like a concept, when I say tone, not
some sort of genre
Is
or?
there something that you haven't done outside of the paradigm that you've already done?
I'm going to do a musical with Mitch that I'm really, really excited about. Yeah, yes. Yes.
So you know what it is, not
Yes.
just that you want to do.
No,
some
I've
musical.
always, I'm not, it's not one of those musicals where, do you think it's going to rain? Yes, I think it's going to rain. Did you bring your umbrella? It's not that at all. But we were really inspired by the film Once. I don't know if you guys saw that, really beautiful.
Phenomenal Academy Award.
And wanted to do not an American version of that, but we were just really inspired by it and really wanted to do a movie with a lot of music.
Well,
And
Mitch is a good writer for that,
yes,
too.
he is. Yes, he is. So.
But I wouldn't do comedy. I've acted in comedy films a couple of times, but I just wouldn't do a comedy.
Not even a
Especially-
dark comedy?
Well, actually, there's this book that I tried to buy the rights to. It's called Dear Mr. Capote. I don't know if anybody's ever read that. Phenomenal book, and that's a dark comedy. Okay, I take that back. I would do a dark comedy.
Not that I can think of. But I'd do anything if it's good. I never thought I'd make a horror film. And then somebody sent me a horror film that was a political allegory, and I thought, cool, I'm going to do a horror film.
Yes.
I was given the advice once that if you're trying to get a script sold, it's easier actually to write the novel first and get that sold and then write your own adaptation to it. And I was just curious, as a novelist, screenwriter, producers, like is that true in any form at all?
Again, from what I know, spec sales these days are pretty rare, and and you have to have an agent. Really, I think there's always the story of when it happened without all those things in place. People do tend to these days, certainly, with unproven writers or whatever, they're looking for a piece of underlying material that has already had commercial success. So if you can write a novel and have it be a bestseller, great. But again, that's a long shot too.
You can't self-publish the novel and then expect that the screenplay is going to have more traction. It would have to have a life. The book would have to have a life before it would mean anything.
I think one of the most famous examples is Peter Hedges and What's Eating Gilbert Grape.
Yes.
When he wrote that as a spec, couldn't get a phone call answered, nobody read it, wrote the novel, but then the novel sold incredibly well.
Right.
And he got to insist on writing the adaptation. But for me, it's sort of like, well, if it's a screenplay, write it as a screenplay. If it's a novel, write it as a novel. And yes, it's true that the two can be interchangeable, but you have to be writing it for a reason. And so go with that. Go with your passion. And if you're not passionate, if you're trying to make it into something, stop writing it immediately and just walk away and go and write something else. And that's the same as producers. You have to be doing it for a reason, or else you shouldn't be doing it.
We spend anywhere between, I would say, 2 and 10 years, sometimes longer, with a piece of material. So it's got to be something that we all feel, that we feel really passionately about, that we want to live with for that long. It's not like television, which is you basically have 6 months. You're with a piece of material, it either sells or doesn't sell, and you move on to the next thing. With especially with independent films and what you have to do to get them made.
What's your longest? Mine is 11 years with Drunk Boat.
I don't want to admit, but it's probably 10 or 11, probably 11 years with Hysteria.
Yeah.
And it was 7.
Oh,
with
you were
Finding
on that for a
Neverland.
long time, weren't you?
Yeah, it was.
I wanted to say to this young woman that I've been writing for my livelihood. It's the one thing that I do for 41 years now. And over the course of those 41 years, I've had a few very lucky and, on a couple of occasions, sort of spectacularly great successes and a lot of really hard years. And one of the big lesson that having been doing this for so long has given to me is that you must not do it for the big success moment, for, picking your dress for the Academy Awards and deciding who you're going to dedicate the book to and thinking about your book signings. You do it because you love it. And it's the love that will sustain you, because the successes, if they come at all, will be few and far between. And now at this point, I feel my greatest satisfaction is just in having endured and in getting to get up in the morning and do something that I look forward to and love. And that cannot be taken away from me. And that will not be controlled by whether somebody buys it, whether an agent represents it, whether a publisher publishes it, whether readers go out and buy it, whether reviewers say it's good. That none of those things will happen, and I'll still be okay if I'm doing work I love. So your best bet is to do what you want to do, not try to second guess this impossible to second guess marketplace.
Right.
That having been said, I do have to add the one to the story, and this it doesn't even in the film world, but my favorite story about getting in one door by going through another, but sort of spectacularly successfully, was, Leonard Cohen wanted to be a poet, just a quiet little poet. And he thought, maybe if I put some of these songs to music.
There you go.
And
By the way, there are prodigies in just about every field of endeavor. There are artistic prodigies, mathematical prodigies, kids, adolescents in MIT, stock market prodigies, millionaire 14-year-olds, some that create social networks. But
You
there
gestured at me when you said that.
yes,
I'm not
he
a
did
millionaire
not.
prodigy.
Yes, he did not invent Facebook, despite what people say. But there are almost no literary prodigies. They just don't exist. There's almost no teenager has ever written a novel of consequence. Very few exceptions. Joyce is one of them. She is at 18 years old, became the toast of the literary world with a phenomenal New York Magazine
And that
article.
was not necessarily good news. In
The-
fact, it wasn't. But at the time, could you have said that to me when I, was splashed on the cover of the New York Times Magazine section in my jeans and sneakers? No. Of course I wanted that, and of course I thought that was the thing to aspire to.
Okay.
Go into more depth.
I'm going to get you right next. Go ahead.
I just want to hear more about what you were just saying, but that it wasn't good. Why you're saying that.
Well, I could talk for a long time about that, and I won't. I'll say read At Home in the World, my memoir, which is very much a book about early success and its dangers. But I also think that, I can speak more generally and referentially to other people besides me and say that when you have very early big success, you can spend the rest of your life trying to replicate it. I don't think that was actually my particular story. I haven't been trying to do again what I did when I was young. I'm not interested in doing that. But I do think that happens a lot. And people, there is the very common phenomenon of the second novel that never matches the second. And in film, there's probably some of that too, no?
I think it happens with
Definitely, music, everything.
Yeah, the sophomore effort. Like I was just in a meeting a couple weeks ago, and I'm working with it'll be a first-time director. Even though he's directed shorts, he's very experienced, but he'll be a first-time feature director, and he's got another project set up with somebody else, and we were just talking about the timing of it all with, and I said, well, the other movie is financed, and they're casting now, and my producing partner on this particular project works for the studio, and she's like, oh, no, we've got to go first. She's like, you never want the sophomore effort, ever, of a director, ever. And it was really jaded and really prejudiced, but she was coming from a place of truth. She's like, you don't want the second time. The third time, maybe, but, only if the second time was good. But, so many people don't want to take a chance on the sophomore effort. So, I don't know, for whatever that's worth.
We used to call it the sophomore slump at ICM.
Yes.
It was classic. You'd sign this great, hot, young writer-director out at Sundance, and then cut to 7 years later, you're still waiting for them to get around to making their second movie. And, sometimes it's worth waiting for. Tamara Jenkins was a classic example, Sons of Beverly Hills. I mean, that was, we were all so excited. We signed her, and I think it was 8 years before she made The Savages, which was worth waiting for, but my God, it's a long time.
Yes.
My question is about the process. In the middle point between artistic intent of the manuscript and the business proposition of a film, as a writer putting a screenplay together, where should you put your midpoint in terms of concessions that you have to make? Because any script is going to change through the process. Is it better to have a very technically sound screenplay that will have a shorter development period, and you'll be able to bring it to production quicker, or to have a stronger story that won't be entirely makeable. Like you'll have to have those revision processes with the director and the actors and so on.
I'm not sure that I understand.
I think that there's a real gray area in there. I mean, you can't really get to one point until one point's solved, until the previous point is solved. You can't get to B until A is finished. So if you don't have a screenplay that makes sense, you don't get to B.
Well, I'm not talking about a screenplay that doesn't make sense. I'm saying having the absolute perfect story versus a story that's producible and you know that will get better as the input is brought into it.
So are you talking about having a script or an idea?
A script. So if you have a script that's producible, it would be good, but you know that as you bring that input in the production process with the actors and the directors and things like that.
Well, can I just interject something? Is I never do a budget and a schedule, which are the two most important things to do. A budget and a schedule until you have a piece of a script, until you have a project that is close to finish. And the producers know when that close to finish is. And then when you do a budget and a schedule, you're pretty much locked in because a budget will determine shooting days, and all that kind of stuff that's kind of locked in. And then you can go out and raise money for that or however you're going to do the financial end of it. But you got to have a real thing that you can do a budget and a schedule on.
And I think, again, my answer to you would be you should think that the script is perfect.
Right.
You
Right.
shouldn't be
that's
sending
true.
anything to anybody that you think could be better or might be made more commercial or maybe it should be more artistic. It's your vision. You have the vision, write it, and you're either meant to be writing screenplays or not. And that doesn't mean you're not good at it or you're not a wonderful human being. The marketplace will speak about your material, and you'll either be making movies for, $100,000 or not. You'll be doing something else, or you'll sell a spec for $5 million. But write the best screenplay imaginable.
Right. Well, the way I was thinking about this is it's a panel on adaptation, so you can't adapt everything that's out there. That's a great story. So if through the lens of an adaptation, because some things will not turn into a great movie, but they might be a great book or play. So it's that kind of a transition.
Same thing. I mean, if you've got the rights to adapt something or you're adapting something, you should have a total vision for your adaptation, and it should have, as everybody I think has said, it should have a great story, and it should be cinematic, or why the hell are you adapting it?
Right.
So, in a way, I think you shouldn't be asking that question. I mean, I understand why you're asking the question, but just go and make it great.
Whatever it is.
And I don't think, speaking as a writer, and you can all tell me if I'm wrong about this one. I did something this summer that I'd never done before, and it was actually inspired by having visited the set of Labor Day and having read the final shooting script and saying, "My God, I could have written this. This is so close to my book." And making the decision next time, if I'm lucky enough to have a novel of mine made into a film, I want a shot at the screenplay. There is a kind of catch-22. If you've never done the screenplay, you don't get to do the screenplay. So I decided I'm going to beat them at their game. I'm going to write. I just finished sold a novel that's coming out next summer when Labor Day comes out, Perfect Storm. I'm going to have the screenplay all set to go. And so I simultaneously finished a novel and then spent the summer writing the screenplay of my novel that hasn't yet come out. And in that novel, once again, I have a situation involving two sisters who are 11 and 13 years old. Their father is a homicide detective who's in charge of the investigation of a series of serial killings. It's very loosely inspired on something that happened in Marin County, California. But it's not really about the serial killings. It's about these two girls and their relationship with their father, a very complicated man. And there are flashbacks in their life. I never think of them as flashbacks, but little moments that we catch glimpses of them with their father when they are younger. And a screenwriter who read the screenplay and liked the screenplay said, you're going to have a problem here because you could have these girls be very young. I'm sure you can already anticipate what the problem's going to be. Yeah. If I've got an 11 and a 13-year-old, I could have them be 3 and 5. Because they're so different that we won't say, oh, they don't look like the girls. But can I have a 9 and 11-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. Can we make a 13-year-old look like an 11-year-old? Can we?
Absolutely.
And I decided I'm not going to do your job for you. I'm going to write this the way it should be written. And if you like my screenplay enough to feel it's a film, you can figure that part out, and it can be changed. But I wanted to give whoever reads it my clearest vision. Am I wrong in doing that?
No,
No.
it's like, budgeting is very important.
Yeah.
As Tracy will attest to, and shooting a 13 and 11-year-old is very, very strict on rules and number of shooting days and length and time and all that kind of stuff. So it adds enormously to the budget. When I shoot a young kid in a feature film, you shoot a 15 or an 18-year-old to look like 15, or and there's a ton of people out there that do that. That's on that issue, but in general, I just wanted to say one thing, and I apologize. In general, even though I've done this backwards, is that we, as a producer, I don't like the novelist to write the screenplay. In general, I can honestly say that. I've only read a few examples, but they're so hung up with their novel that they can't get it into, they can't take a 300-page and put it into 120. It's very difficult, I think, for the
I learned a lot.
novelist.
One of the things that when my screenplay is vastly different from the novel, even in how it ends.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's. I'm not trying to sell you my screenplay, but just to say that I
I'd
think
like to look at
I
it.
think there is a fundamental difference.
Got $1.
That I've never understood it so clearly as doing it. That I had to really go away from the novel to write the screenplay.
Well,
But-
I think anybody, I'm just going to say, I think anybody looking at that, I would say that I think you probably approached it exactly right. Like, write those girls true to who the characters are and what they need to be. Anybody looking at it on the surface is going to look at the novel and know how difficult it is. That if you have two young girls as the star of a movie. They're young. You're not going to get movie stars, to do those, and they're girls. Female-driven movies are harder to make. Kid-driven movies are harder to make. I mean, that is going to be a really difficult movie. Just like in terms of if I'm looking at something and just because we have to think about just all of the sort of financial realities,
Yeah.
and not only is it great material, but then who's going to buy it? Like who's the market for it? How and who's going to give me the money to do it? And so you have to take all those things into consideration. So you're right. Let the producers do their job, and if they get it, if it's a story that they feel like that they can financially make sense about, then you had to do the right thing, which is be true to the story and be true to the characters.
And there may well come a moment. I mean, one of the things I did for ICM was sell underlying rights. They had a big book department, and that was one of my jobs, was to sell those rights to producers and studios. There may well come a moment where you get the call and somebody says,
Of
somebody
course.
wants to buy the underlying rights to the novel, they don't want your screenplay.
Right.
You might get lucky and they say, fantastic, but it will create a little wrinkle.
Mostly what I meant to do was to address the
Yeah.
question this young man has, is whether we compromise the work to second guess the
Right.
industry. And my choice for myself is just do what I want to do.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, just to irritate all the writers here, could you please tell them how long it took you to write Labor Day?
Oh, I get into trouble when I say this. Labor Day was a little gift. I do tend to write fast, but it took me 10 days.
See?
10 very, and to die
10
for.
days from now.
To Die For was
You
about,
can
but
have-
it doesn't, the first time this happened, which was 31 years ago when I wrote my novel Baby Love, was also, it was a 2-week novel. And I thought then, oh my gosh, I'm going to have,
35
20,
novels a
yeah,
year.
it doesn't work that way. And there was a long process before then when you don't know that you're writing, but you are, and lots of things are germinating. And then I sat down, and that almost was beside the point when I got down to it.
Yes.
Can I just ask your writing process? Is there a time of day that you are strict with when you do?
Absolutely. And that's mine. And I never say this is how it will work, or, it's like as ridiculous as saying, what kind of laptop to buy. But for me, I would rather have 10 days in my zone than 6 months of, getting an hour or two a day. So number one, I leave home and I go away from absolutely everything, and I don't cook meals, clean my house, wash my hair, anything but inhabit the world of those characters to the complete exclusion of, I used to just check into a motel, now I try to get to a writing residency, or I'll go somewhere, I'm about to go somewhere again. I don't have a clue what I'll be writing when I get there. It's like, build the field and they will come, which was true of Labor Day. The day before I wrote Labor Day, the night before I started, I didn't know what I was going to write the next morning. I just said a little prayer, story come to me, characters come to me, and they did. But I will say that for me, I honor my own body clock, and I happen to be a morning person. And so I get up really early. I don't speak to anybody. Do not check my email. I don't want the world of other stimuli to come in. I want to completely be in that world of the work. And however you accomplish it, and you don't need to have a big fancy desk or office or computer or a residency at the McDowell Colony, wonderful as it is, you go check into a seedy little motel and have quiet.
This isn't about the process at all, but the whole reason that I do what I do is because of her, is because of writers. Like, I'm so passionate about other people's work and their words and what it takes, because it is so hard to write anything. I know you say it comes easy, but those of us who have tried and not succeeded and writing things ourselves, I so honor the words. I so honor the inspiration and the work that goes into something, and that's what inspires me, and it's why I do what I do. It's not some big, I have to put my imprint and make a movie that's it's really about the words, and I'm so I try to honor the writer always, because it's always the person that gets short shrift, I think, certainly in the movie business, but it's why I get up.
Yes.
Thank you. I just found it fascinating that you just said, Joyce quote, that you didn't have anything germinating, even slightly, because that you went somewhere. I mean, did you start with, I want to write a book? Like, I love writing, I want to write books. Here we go.
I start with my obsessions. I start with my obsessions. And I go back and back and back to my obsessions. And were you to sit down and, read all my novels, heaven forbid, in the course of a couple of weeks, you'd know some of my obsessions. Okay. My weird, you'd see Dolly Parton coming up a lot. You'd see skating. You'd see babies and breastfeeding. I mean, there's just like odd things that I just know. But in the case of Labor Day, I'll tell you one thing that just to give you an example of the big leap from one to the other, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on my particular story, but I went to bed and I thought about just moments in my life when something powerful had moved me and spoken to me, and I wanted to find those vibrating strings. And one that came to me was when I was about 36 years old and living as a single mother in Keene, New Hampshire, with 3 young kids, and my mother had just died, and it was winter, and life was hard. I got a letter one day, as writers do a lot, that addressed in pencil with a long string of numbers in the return address, which is a pretty good guess where it comes from, prison. And it was a man who wrote to me from a maximum security facility in the California desert, saying that on the cell block where he lived, everybody else was, waiting for a penthouse and biker chick to get delivered, but he loved my little syndicated newspaper column about me and my kids. And this embarked me, and he then proceeded to say, it's just like I lived through your family, and he knew all the stuff about my children and me, and my sons wanting to be a baseball pitcher, and he had tips for him. And well, it actually started with just a very short little note signed Grizzly. And I sent back a very short note
ZZ
back.
Or S?
Yeah.
ZZ or S?
ZZ.
Okay.
ZZ. And I sent a very short little note back. I think it was Christmas time, so I sent our family Christmas card, me and the kids sitting under the tree, and I got a 25-page letter back, all tiny, tiny little pencil writing, and I wrote back, then I sent back my book of collection of my columns, got a 50-page letter back. Before I knew it, that winter, I was embarked on a correspondence with a man in prison. And I had a regular life, supposedly real life boyfriend, but the truth was that at the end of the day, there was nothing that moved me more powerfully than these letters from this man in prison. And I would wait till everybody went to bed and get into bed with my glass of wine and read these letters from Grizzly. And a whole little sort of, I had known so many seemingly good men who turned out to be bad that I thought maybe the seemingly bad man is going to turn out to be good. And
Seemingly bad.
well, anyway, it kind of came to a crescendo when Grizzly wrote to say that he was getting out on parole.
Oh, Jesus.
And I had never asked him. I always thought it was kind of like a rude question. What are you in for? But when he said he was coming and he was going to take a bus to New Hampshire from California and be there in time for Little League season, to help Willie, learn how to pitch correctly, I did decide to call the prison. And went through a whole chain of command and got to the social worker in charge of Grizzly. And I said, well, so now that he's coming out in parole, he says, I've been, he's my friend. And I thought, maybe I should find out what he was in for. I was so, and she said, well, it is against prison policy for us to release this information. And I said, oh, right. I'm so embarrassed. I should never have even said. She said, but you sound like a nice woman. So I am going to tell you, but first I want to ask, are you alone right now? Or is there somebody nearby if you need them? And I was alone, in fact, and there wasn't somebody nearby. But I said, I'm fine. And she said, well, Tim, or Grizzly as he is known, the first news is that he will not be getting out on parole this year or any time in the next 362 years. He got his name for the particularly grisly, I'm going to backtrack and say that one of our connections was that we were both orphans, and he talked a lot about how my mother had just died and his mother had died and we didn't have parents. The particularly grisly murder of both of his parents, murder and decapitation. I will now jump quickly because I've taken too long with this story, but to say that Labor Day is not about any of that. And as you know, having read the book, the man in prison is not at all grisly. The woman is not me. But there was a little germ of something that I knew was a live wire. And there are about 10 of my live wires in that book, and I know every one of them. Single mother, pies, dancing. They're all there. I'm that 14-year-old girl. I'm that mean, bad 13-year-old girl who said 14-year-old girl who says penis in front of the boy to just kind of get it going. I'm all of those people, and you have to know who you are and know your dark sides and go to your darkest moments and the moments when you felt most alive and maybe most close to death, and those will reveal to you what you should be writing.
It almost seems like maybe the ending that maybe you had in mind with your dream. No, I'm not saying that
It was,
thought that, but
I didn't, by the time I started writing the next morning, that was all gone. I like to write stories that have some kind of goodness in them and redemption. So none of that was there, but it had all soaked through in the night, and in the morning there was just this boy talking to me and saying, it was just the two of us, my mother and me, in this little town in New Hampshire.
thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad I asked that question.
There you go. I
You
knew
were
that.
taking her question
Yeah.
instead of mine.
Yes, sir.
I guess I sort of want to go back to what Tracey was talking about for a second. I've always believed, if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. And so I think it always starts with a writer. But one of the things I'm walking away today with, which I really appreciate a lot in my own life, is what I hear are people talking about passions. And whether you're a producer or director or writer, an actor, whatever you may be, you've got to find that passion, and it helps reignite. So, thank you.
I think this is for Chase. Was Crooked Lane based on a story? Because I thought I read that in the bio.
That was all fiction.
Did you? And you wrote it.
My son, who's a writer, and I've optioned 3 of his short stories. He's a phenomenal writer. Wrote a blog, and we made that fiction, but we made it real. Okay, let me rephrase that. He wrote a fictional blog that I had him write, and then we wrote a script based upon that fictional blog, and then we said, oh, let's make it so that it's real. So we marketed the film by saying, oh, this is all real. Those apparitions and shit that's going on in the background is real, based upon New Hampshire folklore.
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't, no. It's all dirty little minds.
Because I know, I was just curious about the process then from there, because I know some of having, been in some of the process of at the end after it was written, can you talk a little bit about that, then taking that and moving into it?
My son Thomas, well, you know Thomas.
Yeah.
He wrote a short story called Lady, which I started writing a feature script for, but I decided I couldn't do a feature script until I'd written a couple of shorts. So then I did Crooked Lane, and right now I'm writing the short film Clown Bait, actually. I don't know if you've read his short stories, but they're very, very dark. And this one is a phenomenal short story that I'm going to write like a 20-page short for, and then eventually direct it, hopefully next year. But it's very dark, and then I think I'll be ready to do Lady. But what was your question? I'm sorry. Oh, Crooked Lane. What's it? No, it's Thomas is one of these phenomenal writers. He brings out these, like I think Ava, Andy Cusack, in Crooked Lane was a phenomenal character to play with. Looking at Crooked Lane, I wish I'd written it better. I wish I'd have directed it better. But that's what you do this for, is you learn as you go along. All in all, it was a good film, not a great film by any way, shape, or form.
Except for the production, which is
Except
spot
for the
on.
production was phenomenal.
The producer on that.
The producer rocks. But it's a weird process, yeah.
You sure?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the premise, adding to what you said, is it doesn't scare you, it's not worth doing. I mean, you all have devoted your lives to what you're doing and spent years, and it has to scare you in some way. You have to tap into that. And I think we all get mixed up in the business side of things and the commercial side quickly, and just to come home back to that source, that the crux of why you're doing it is so important. And thank you so much for sharing your very scary story about your fellow inmate.
My fellow inmate.
No, I will add something to that if we're being a little gushy. I think I certainly view my years in the agency world as my kind of lost years in that sense, because I think I was chasing the thing that so many people, and I'll bet you 95% of the people in this room sort of secretly want, which is, you want to know stars, you want to make a lot of money, you want to do all these things, and the film industry, it dangles all of those carrots, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of doing it for those reasons, and they chase those reasons, and and my wife said, the day I left the agency world, she turned to me and said, "You're already a much nicer person," and it's still producing. I still view it as a journey of self-discovery, and I think you should, because if you're an artist, I think producing is an art. I think you two probably agree with me. It has to be a journey of self-discovery, and and yes, and you have to sort of, you have to chase that passion. You have to, because if you don't, if you're trying to do it for other reasons that don't satisfy your gut, and everybody knows what their gut says, and your gut can say, I want to go and make Star Wars and The Matrix, and God bless, and and you can immediately, when you see those films, you know who the right people are when they make those films. You just see it and you feel it, and you know when the wrong people make those films, because it's just horrible, and unfortunately a lot of those films get made. But so yes, I think that's an important thing to kind of file away and remember, that you probably are going to take a lot of wrong turns and do these things for the wrong reasons, but always come back to your gut, whatever that is.
What I just showed and threw at the back of my iPad is, and some of you know this, my sort of philosophy is that if you're not on the edge, you're taking up too much room.
Yep. I'll get gushy for just a second. I started out in the film industry when I left high school, and I was acting in high school. I left high school and went to Kansas City Art Institute to study film and act and all that kind of crap in the 60s. But a personal accident caused me to leave that career path, and I stayed in high tech for over 25 years, and I was successful in high tech. But I always had the passion to come back and do, and so I had my lost years. But I came back in 1999 into film, and I just love everything that now I enjoy getting up and working every day. Then I didn't. But, it's like I got hooked into film. You heard the story about all these people that saw Citizen Kane,